Hello and welcome to Sansad TV. You're watching Viewpoint with me, Frank RAUSAN PEREIRA. Well, India and the United States need to work together successfully for a prosperous and peaceful 21st century, US Vice-President JD Vance said, calling for closer ties between the countries across sectors. Now, the Vice President's remarks came on Monday, a day after he met Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and both countries said that they had made progress in negotiating a bilateral trade deal which has been on the cards for quite some time now. In this edition of Viewpoint, we will analyze the key takeaways from the US Vice President's meeting with Prime Minister Modi. Joining me on the program today are Ambassador MANJEEV Singh PURI, career diplomat, and Dr. BHARTI CHHIBBER, Professor of International Relations and Foreign Policy, Delhi University. Thank you to my guests for joining me on this edition of Viewpoint. Ambassador, I'd like to start the program with you first. I'd like to hear your initial thoughts on the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and US Vice President.
Frank, thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me to your program. Look, this was a very important meeting, and let me put it important in a broad and strategic sense. Vice President JD Vance is not just the United States Vice President, but on the same wavelength as President Trump. And his visit earlier on in the administration signaled an interest of that administration in building relations with India. Therefore, very important. This was a visit about bigger things. The Vice President met the Prime Minister. They discussed the larger issues, of course, the issues of trade, the issues of defense cooperation, the issues of other kinds of cooperations, all came up. And what has happened is a signaling has been done that both sides want progress in the matters. The progress will be achieved by the nitty-gritty negotiators and all of them. And Vice President Vance very neatly articulated this particular bit, that India and United States should cooperate together for a peaceful and prosperous 21st, the next millennium, the coming years, during his speech in Jaipur. Very important visit, and important in terms of the right signaling that has emanated from this particular visit.
Absolutely. Okay, let me bring in Professor BHARTI CHHIBBER into the picture as well, and let's try and understand from you really as far as the visit is concerned, the key takeaways, key highlights, what really stands out for you as far as this visit is concerned.
Well, thank you, Frank PEREIRA. It's absolutely a pleasure to be on your program again. How I see it, one, if you remember, in the latest address that Vice President Vance has given in Rajasthan, he spoke about a couple of things, but two things stand out. Once he spoke about how we share values. And if you remember, then he said that he has seen an amalgamation, which I have been repeating time and again, an amalgamation where we are talking about our traditional values, where we are talking about Vasudev Kutumbakam, that is the whole world is one, and we have a shared future. And he has also seen along with that how India is looking at the future. So that is something which he has addressed in his address. And second thing, he mentioned that India and US, we are going to be working together for a shared future. Again, I'll say that there is a lot of resonance in the two between India and US here, which has actually channelized the whole dialogue between the two countries in the present context. Now, let us just take it forward from there. The whole dynamics about the tariff arguments which have been placed here, as you know. Well, one, they have agreed at the basics, you know, what they call as terms of reference. So that's a plus point. Plus the couple of visits, Vice President Vance's visit is not standalone. It's a kind of number of visits that they had together, whether it's Prime Minister going to the US, or we have External Affairs Minister, we have Finance Minister or Commerce Minister going to the state. Similarly, vice versa, they have met at different places, including in Europe very recently for the AI Summit. And also just take the latest where we see that not only they have agreed on the terms of reference, but in the 90 days, you know, they're actually planning to talk about or bringing out something what we call the initial stage of the bilateral agreement, which you have been talking about. And one thing I like to add here, Frank PEREIRA ji, that when when we talk about trade, it's not standalone. Well, in present times, if you have a look, then everything is related. It is related to strategic relations, it is related to technology. The compact, which was spoken about a lot in Prime Minister Modi's US visit on February 13, it talks about military, it talks about technology. At the same time, it also talks about commerce. So what we are looking at presently is a holistic approach to the whole dynamics between India and US, and Vice-President Vance's visit has added to that.
Okay, holistic approach is what we are looking at really as far as India-US ties are concerned, and we've seen high-level interactions between the two countries, and that definitely is a positive to take forward. Ambassador, let me bring you into the picture now. Off late, because of President Trump's, reciprocal tariffs and all of that we've seen over the last couple of months or so, we've seen that, the narrative has all been about tariffs and trade. Is the India-US relationship beyond that? What can we expect?
Frank, look, we would like the relationship to be beyond that. And I'm sure many in the United States would. But let's also understand that President Trump and, of course, Vice President JD Vance too, come from the ideas of make America great again. On tariffs, it's a little important to understand a very fundamental point. This is not about what we understand by the word tariffs, i.e. customs duties. It's about trade balance. And for us, it isn't going to be an easy business of balancing this trade without huge imports of hydrocarbons or defense equipment. So there are a number of issues. Mr. Trump and his entire administration are all about their interests. That's their fundamental interest. They will also turn around and tell us that you bear much more of the burden in terms of the Indo-Pacific and so on. Let's be quite honest and prepared about this. While we may have our ideas and what we are thinking, they come from a fairly different kind of perspective where there is an element of isolationism. Now, Vice President JD Vance has a strong India connect. His wife is of Indian origin. On this trip itself, he has demonstrated that interest, and they visited Akshardham in Delhi, they visited the Amer Fort, and they were in the iconic Taj Mahal, and I'm sure that will be the abiding picture 25 years later in the Vance family album. Having said all this, these are positivities on chemistry. You now possibly have somebody higher up in the administration of President Trump who perhaps would have an empathetic and sympathetic positive view about India. And I'm afraid these things do matter. Chemistry is important. So this visit has been important at cementing all of this. But at the end of the day, remember, the Trump administration is strong about its interests, their own personal interests, their own domestic policy interests, and of course, what they say publicly, America, make America great again. We have to stand up for India's interests, and I'm sure we will. To say that meeting grounds can't be found, not at all. Meeting grounds will be found, and I see lots of commonalities. The 90-day pause has given us a methodology of moving forward, and I see that there is a kind of fundamental interest that let's try and bridge if there is a gap, and let's try and take things forward. It is in mutual interest.
All right, talking about this mutual interest, Bharti ji, let me bring you into the picture once again. We've heard this, and we've heard it yet again from the US Vice President, where he's talking about, mutually beneficial for both the countries. When we look at a mutually beneficial trade agreement, what kind of trade agreement do you see being put in place, and what do you think we need to focus on?
Well, again, when we talk about mutually beneficial, when on the one hand we are talking about America first, as has been reiterated both by President Trump and Vice President Vance. At the same time, India is taking the challenge, and actually leading from the front, I would say. Very proactive foreign policy right from the time President Trump was elected and took over. What we can see, or what we are going to see in this, that, as I said, it will be multi-dimensional or multi-sectoral. We're going to talk about tariffs, non-tariff barriers, as well as supply chain resilience. Another important thing which we need to keep in mind, that our economies, they can be, and they are complementary to each other. Well, US on the one hand has an edge in terms of technology and investment. India on the other hand, supply chain resilience, also are very highly skilled IT force, and also in terms of the cost effectiveness. So we complement each other. I would say that this whole dynamics of the tariff or the bilateral trade agreement, it can be something which can also be a blueprint for India to negotiate further, as we are already negotiating with UK and European Union. So I would say it will be an amalgamation, not only of all these things, but in addition to that, more strategic in terms of technology transfer, in terms of joint production of goods. Or as President Vance, Vice President Vance also mentioned, that we are even looking at in joint production or further technology transfer in terms of energy, also in terms of military security. Take the whole dynamics of Indo-Pacific. Now here we are not only talking about security vis-a-vis particular country, but we are also talking about transnational organized crime. And when we talk about transnational organized crime, we are talking about counter-terrorist measures. We are also talking about how to deal with other issues, including smuggling or human trafficking or security of the sea lines. So undersea cables, information sharing, all these become very, very important part. And I see Frank Pereira here a kind of opportunity for India, because of course US and India, we are on the same page to a larger extent. Also there's further opportunity in terms of reforms, also in terms of the markets, because Indian market is very important.
We'll come back to opportunities. We'll discuss that at length really as far as whether this could be an opportunity for India. Ambassador, let me bring you into the picture once again. While all of this is happening, there's another big player which has been closely watching everything that's happening within India and the United States as well, and which has a major role to play as far as trade in the global order is concerned. I'm talking about China. They've also sent out messages and feelers to say that they are going to look after their own interests. So be careful before you get into any kind of a trade deal. How do you see that panning out?
So, Frank, there's no doubt that this is not the game from 20 years back when the Western world determined everything and they were the only players. There is another player in the global world. For us, I'm afraid this is a big contestation because they are on our borders and there are very serious contestation issues vis-a-vis them, although they are huge trading partners for us. Look, I don't want to queer the pitch, but I want to just tell you this, that my understanding would be that with the Trump administration, things may not necessarily be looked at in a holistic manner and different silos would have to be tackled. This business of trade balance would be an important and it's a difficult one. It's not an easy one. Otherwise, what is the problem of American goods having been imported into India? Their comparative advantage deficiencies are there. There are a lot of these kind of issues, and it becomes quite a problematic set of issues to try and work them out. The areas that they are interested in, possibly other than petroleum and the area of defense, are the areas of agriculture, dairy. These are not particularly easy ones for us as a developing country. I'm very happy that Professor Madam has mentioned a number of areas, but she has had no choice but to leave out that the greatest global challenge is having to be left out, which is the idea of climate change, with Mr. Trump taking the view that you should have drill, baby, drill, and more fossil fuels. Now look, we are a country which can't do away with coal, which can't do away with fossil fuels for some time, but it's because we have a huge imperative. We need these for the minimum development level for our people. And yet we are strongly committed to net zero 2070, building up renewable energies and all of them. And the largest and most important economy in the world is now looking the other way. Having said all this, let me say, India and the United States, to quote one of our former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, we are natural partners. We must build on complementarities. We must build on what are opportunities there. The China challenge certainly is there. But again, let me just say one thing to you. Given the transactional nature of President Donald Trump, don't rule out a deal with China. And this is something that we need to be on the watch out for. All of these things are possible. There is a degree of, there's a high degree of unpredictability of what comes out of Washington. And we need to, I'm afraid, navigate our way through all of this. We are a country which is interested in good, friendly, strong, and positive relations with them. I believe they too are. But some of those other elements are inherent in the way this administration takes decisions and their domestic policy interests. And we need to work through them and work with them.
This makes me think about another question. I'll come back to you on that, on what are the areas of concern, what are the areas that need special focus going forward. Hold that thought. I'll come back to you with that question, Ambassador. Before that, let me bring in the Professor once again. She was making a point about opportunities, really. As far as opportunities are concerned, could this lead to several new opportunities, new challenges for India?
Well, absolutely. I completely agree with you there. Challenges, of course, are galore, but then we need to see that how President Trump has agreed that India, or Prime Minister Modi, to be specific, is a tough negotiator. So I believe that India is in safe hands in terms of the negotiation power that we have. And also just see the rising power of India, both in terms of the strategic importance to the US, whether in Indo-Pacific or otherwise, and also in terms of a rising economy. And here, Frank, I'll also bring another point, which is very important, that we talk about the challenges. One of the challenges which has been repeatedly said is kind of deglobalization. Well, I don't think that we are anywhere near deglobalization. Well, the two main factors of globalization, that is the transport and communication. Both the factors, you'll say, lot of technological advancement in the last couple of years, more than what happened a century ago or a decade ago. So we are in a globalized world, and all the more we need each other in terms of dealing with a lot of things. So I would say that challenges are there, but India is in capable hands to maneuver those challenges into opportunities. Take the latest example. Well, China has been seeing dumping, in India. And in fact, we have taken them to WTO also earlier. And the latest, in view of the tariff by the President Trump, there's another fear that we'll have more dumping from China, especially in the context of steel, So what India has done, India has preempted that, in terms of the facts and figures that they have, what we call safeguard measure or safeguard tariffs, 12% that we have imposed. Another thing, take a look at this, that of course we are negotiating a bilateral deal with the US in vision with our strength, and the whole idea is that we will double our exports in goods to $500 billion US by 2030. Similarly, at the same time, India has an opportunity when we talk about diversifying our export, and instead of a country which is importing a lot, now we will be moving towards exporters and also manufacturing. The whole idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat, I think we are moving all the more in that direction. So that's another advantage that we get. Also, a lot of regionalism. I would say that in view of what is happening internationally, we'll see a lot of countries coming together bilaterally and regionally, and which will again give India, because it has opportunity to invest, it has opportunity to help other countries diversify its export and import basket. At the same time, I'd like to make another point which is very critical. When we talk about these whole dimensions of deglobalization or globalization, then one important factor that is there, that India is seen as the global voice or the voice of the global south. But I would say that now India has the opportunity not only to be the voice of global south, which we have very clearly or amplified, I would say, we have shown that in G20, but now there's an opportunity to go even beyond that, as a key economic player in the global world. So I would say that India would be able to, of course, it will take a lot of efforts, but India is moving in that direction, would be able to manage that in terms of protecting the domestic industries, also in terms of having a role at the key global player, in terms of the rising economy, as well as balancing its relations, both with the important powers, including US and Russia, and many others, which it have been doing over the years.
Absolutely. All right. We need to ensure that we put our best foot forward. There are several opportunities, and if we do the right things, the sky is the limit as far as we are concerned, is what the professor is suggesting. All right, Ambassador, let me come back to you now. Let's look at areas of concern, areas that need to, that we need to keep a close eye on as far as the bilateral relationship is concerned.
So, Frank, first, I just want to make one little point to you. Even if the clouds are dark and thick, there are silver linings and opportunities, and let me make two of them, and the professor alluded to that. That was very nice. One was, it pushes us to try and do trade deals with both the UK and the EU, something which have been languishing for years. That's important because diversification is, I'm afraid, today going to be important, no matter our friendship with the United States. The other thing is, hopefully this will lead us to undertake at least reforms 2.0, which have been stuck for many, many years here, no matter our conversation. Because we need to make our economy fit for purpose for the next 100 years. And I'm afraid the previous lot, the steam seems to have kind of run out on all of them. You're talking about areas that are of concern to us. Without doubt, the greatest and most important area of concern is China and the way the United States sees it. You know, when we started off, if you recall, on the 20th of January and the 21st of January, in all his statements, President Trump had singled out two leaders as great leaders, and one was Xi Jinping. He even invited him for the inaugural. He didn't go, that's a different matter. There is this particular business that we need to be particularly careful of, that through these transactional relationships, they don't come to some kind of a deal, because that is certainly a possibility and shouldn't be ruled out. Think of this TikTok business and so on and so forth. Secondly, I just want to point out to you, the issues vis-a-vis China are not just US and China and the global economy and what it will do to all that. For us, there are direct concerns. There is the issue of the Indo-Pacific. Can we see the US withdrawing a little bit from it as a result of the kind of isolationist ideas? The America first, stick to within the two borders of the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, etc. You pay for your own, exactly what is happening in Europe. So there's a lot of these kind of issues which are important to us because the geography in which we are, there are certainly huge amounts of challenge. Now, I would have said, without doubt, cooperation in sustainability, energy, etc. are important. Let's leave sustainability out for whatever reason. But cooperations in science and technology are particularly relevant to us. Cooperations in artificial intelligence. Can we try and take this forward? Again, I'll say, not such an easy thing. Because the Americans today, under President Trump, are not about collaboration. They want you to accept them, their ideas and so on. That's exactly what is happening with Europe, that their tech bros, what they want is kind of lowering the guardrails, both in America and in the other countries. And they'll be equally tough with us. So it isn't such a simple matter. IPRs, etc., will not be an easy thing. This mood of collaboration may not be there. And then we have the issue of people's movement, migrations, etc. I think we as a country believe very strongly that, look, we're not getting into people who are illegally getting themselves across. No, let's leave that out. But we think we are a country which has skills, people who can complement what the United States says. Look at our achievers there. We are a country which can do all of this. And does the United States appreciate the good bits that the Indians bring, the skill sets that they bring, because that will be important for the United States. These are all the things, the geopolitics of it, the China angle. And let me also make one other last point, because it's very relevant today as a result of what happened yesterday, which is the question of leveraging the US and its great abilities vis-a-vis Pakistan, which is a very serious issue as far as we are concerned, that country, the way it behaves and so on and so forth. And can the United States bring in its huge amounts of influence in that country to tell them that, look, terrorism, fomenting terrorism, pushing terrorism, and all these ideas, cannot have any place in today's globalized world.
Absolutely. All right, Ambassador, thank you for so beautifully summing all of those issues and, really tying them up together and presenting them to us in that way. All right, Professor, please close the show for us with your concluding remarks on the best way forward and what next.
Well, I would say that India-US relations are definitely going to move from strength to strength in spite of the lot of hype about the present tariff issue. One, of course, because now I see that there's more understanding and appreciation of India's strategic autonomy, its position vis-a-vis the global issues. And also the second point is now more or less it's two-way process. One, of course, India is looking for technology transfer and co-production in India, but at the same time, US also looking for our markets, as well as something very important which have been stressing is Indo-Pacific. Well, I don't see anything changing in the Indo-Pacific, in spite of it's been argued that perhaps there won't be a lot of emphasis on regionalism or these kind of groupings. We will be having a Quad meeting in India, and I expect that President Trump will be here, and it will be further collaboration at that time that we'll be seeing between India and US. Also, another important factor is, as I said, it's a multi-dimensional partnership. We are not only talking about an economic deal, we are talking about beyond that. We are looking at something which is called or based on what we say shared strategic interest. The very important example, what happened in Kashmir, a kind of carnage, but what we have received from the US President Trump or even from Vice President Vance was not just condolence, but a kind of acceptance that India has to tackle it, and it's a very important thing, because what we call counterterrorism, India and US already have a counterterrorism working group. And also India and US, they are working in terms of information sharing. They both understand, because they have gone through so much, so they both understand that terrorism is a menace which needs to be taken care. And that brings me to the whole argument of transnational organized crime. They're working on it in Indo-Pacific, and presently what I see is that their multidimensional partnership is going to move forward in terms of economy, in terms of strategic cooperation, Indo-Pacific, and wider global platform. So I definitely see it working forward.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us, and so beautifully, covering this entire issue of bilateral relationship between India and the United States. What's coming out of this discussion is that the trade talks that have been going on are definitely in the right direction and could be a good roadmap for us to deal with other trade pacts, be it with the UK or the EU. The cooperation on science and technology is crucial. India and the United States are natural allies, and their partnership is multi-dimensional. It is only going to go from strength to strength. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Viewpoint. See you again next time.